You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet shift in the air when you walk into a room. Conversations pause half a second too long. Eyes study you differently. They can't explain it, but they can feel something changing. They thought you would break. That was the unspoken assumption. Pressure, isolation, doubt. Applied slowly, strategically. Not enough to destroy you instantly. Just enough to bend you. Just enough to make you question yourself. But you didn't bend the way they expected. And now something unsettles them. It's subtle. You speak less, but your words land heavier. You react, but your presence feels sharper. You're not louder, you're deeper. And depth makes people nervous. They can feel something changing. What they don't realize is that this shift didn't happen overnight. It was engineered, carefully, through silence, through setbacks, through moments you almost gave up but didn't. Somewhere along the way, a quiet contract was written about you, who you would remain, how far you would go, when you would fold. The price has come due, just not in the way anyone expected. And now, whether they admit it or not, they're starting to sense it. You are not who they planned for. Long before you understood your own depth, decisions were made about you, not out loud, not formally, but quietly in conversations you weren't part of, in glances, in assumptions, in the way people summarized you in a single sentence as if that was enough. They labeled you early, too intense, too quiet, too emotional, too ambitious, too different. And once a label is placed, people stop looking any deeper. It becomes convenient, predictable, manageable. That was the invisible contract, an unspoken agreement about who you were allowed to become. You were expected to stay within the outline they drew for you, to react the way you always reacted, to doubt yourself at the same pressure points, to shrink when challenged, to remain accessible, readable, harmless. They underestimated your depth. What they saw as moodiness was introspection. What they called overthinking was pattern recognition. What they dismissed as sensitivity was awareness. But it was easier for them to believe you were fragile than to admit you were evolving. And in many ways, they benefited from your silence. When you didn't argue back. When you absorbed the tension. When you carried the weight without announcing it. Your quiet compliance made everything stable for them. You were predictable until you weren't. Because beneath all of it, something was forming. Every misunderstanding, every dismissal, every time you felt unseen, it pressed against something inside you. You were never difficult. You were becoming. And the moment you begin to see that clearly, awareness turns into something heavier. You start recognizing how often you were reduced, how often you edited yourself to keep the peace, how often you questioned your own instincts because someone else seemed more certain. That's when awareness shifts into something deeper, not anger, recognition. There is a cost to being different, and you've paid it quietly. You were the intense one, the one who asked deeper questions when everyone else was satisfied with surface answers. The one who noticed shifts in tone, subtle disrespect, hidden motives. That awareness made people uncomfortable. Sometimes you were told you were too much, too driven, too sensitive, too serious. Other times you were too quiet, too reserved, too hard to read. You learned that no matter which version you presented, someone would find it inconvenient. So you tried adjusting, softening your edges, laughing when you didn't find something funny, explaining yourself in smaller pieces so you wouldn't overwhelm anyone. But growth has a side effect no one warns you about. You start outgrowing people. Conversations feel repetitive. Ambitions misalign. Values separate. And the distance isn't dramatic, it's subtle. You just stop fitting in places that once felt familiar. That kind of evolution is lonely. You felt watched at times, judged in ways no one openly admitted, as if your silence was suspicious, as if your focus was arrogance, as if your refusal to engage in small drama was some kind of threat. And maybe it was, because when you don't participate in chaos, you expose it. There were moments you were exhausted, not from failure, but from constantly calibrating yourself in rooms that never fully understood you. From carrying depth in environments that rewarded noise. But here's what matters. Most people go back. They shrink to fit old spaces. They dull their edge to regain approval. They trade potential for comfort. You didn't, even when it would have been easier. Even when isolation tempted you to compromise. Even when doubt whispered that maybe they were right about you. You stayed with the tension. You absorbed the rejection without letting it define you. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The resistance didn't weaken you. It sharpened you. Every betrayal refined your boundaries. Every misunderstanding strengthened your self-trust. Every lonely season trained you to stand without applause. What felt like opposition was conditioning. And now you don't just feel different. You see differently. Let's be clear about something. They were never villains in a dramatic story. They were comfortable, predictable, conditioned by routine, and reinforced by familiarity. Stability is their priority. Patterns make them feel safe. And then there's you. You represent unpredictability. Not chaos, depth. The kind of depth that doesn't announce itself, but quietly shifts dynamics. You question assumptions without raising your voice. You detach without making a scene. You evolve without asking for permission. That unsettles people who rely on consistency to feel in control. They operate from fear of loss, loss of relevance, loss of influence, loss of the version of you they understood. You operate from depth, from growth, from internal calibration, from long-term vision. And people instinctively resist what they can't control. When they couldn't predict your reactions anymore, they called you distant. When they couldn't influence your decisions, they called you stubborn. When your silence stopped being passive and started being intentional, they felt it. They didn't make a deal with the devil. They made a deal with comfort. The devil was never some dark force. It was insecurity, gossip disguised as concern, doubt projected onto you so they wouldn't have to confront their own stagnation. It was the quiet hope that pressure would push you back into a shape they recognized. Comfort always negotiates with potential. It whispers, "Stay the same. It's safer." But you didn't stay the same. And now they can feel something changing. Not because you've become louder. Not because you've become aggressive. But because you've become less available to manipulation. Less reactive to subtle provocations. Less dependent on external validation. That's what they feared, not your anger. Your independence. The more you understand this, the less personal it becomes. Their resistance wasn't about destroying you. It was about protecting their comfort. And once you see that clearly, the focus shifts away from them and back to you. For a long time, you thought the battle was external. It wasn't. Your greatest conflict never happened in front of witnesses. It happened in silence, in late nights, in overthinking spirals. In the quiet moments when confidence slipped and doubt got loud, your biggest battle wasn't them. It was your own doubt. There were days you questioned your worth, wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe you were too intense, too distant, too ambitious. Maybe shrinking would make life easier. Maybe blending in would finally bring peace. You considered it, adjusting your standards, lowering your expectations, laughing at things that didn't align, pretending not to notice disrespect, tolerating environments that drained you. That was the real temptation. Not failure, self-abandonment. There were moments you wanted revenge, too. Not necessarily dramatic destruction, just proof. Proof that they underestimated you. Proof that their projections were wrong. Proof that you could rise high enough to make them regret it. But revenge is still reaction. And something in you knew that reacting would tie you to the very system you were trying to outgrow. So the war continued internally. Self-sabotage tried to creep in. Procrastination. Overanalysis. Pulling back right when momentum started building. Almost confirming their expectations so you wouldn't have to carry the pressure of proving them wrong. You almost signed the contract yourself. The contract that said stay small, stay predictable, stay safe. That was the crucible, not the gossip, not the rejection, not the isolation, the decision between comfort and growth, between ego-driven retaliation and disciplined restraint, between temporary validation and long-term evolution. And here's what separates you from most people. You hesitated, you struggled, but you didn't surrender. You didn't collapse back into an earlier version just to feel accepted again. Instead, you endured the discomfort of uncertainty. You let the doubt burn without letting it dictate your direction. And slowly, something began to crystallize. The noise quieted. The impulse to prove softened. Clarity replaced chaos. You realized the war was never about defeating anyone. It was about mastering yourself. The shift didn't arrive with an announcement, no dramatic exit, no final speech, no visible rebellion. It was quieter than that. One day, you simply stopped explaining yourself. You stopped arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. Stopped proving your intentions to those who had already decided their version of the story. Stopped oversharing your plans with minds that secretly hoped you would fail. You realized explanation is often a negotiation for acceptance, and you were done negotiating. Silence became strategy. Not passive silence, not wounded withdrawal, intentional restraint. You started answering less and observing more. You noticed patterns instead of reacting to them. You let people reveal themselves fully instead of interrupting the process with your defense. They expected noise. You became calculated where they anticipated emotional reactions. They found composure. Where they expected impulsive responses, they met patience. Your calm unsettled them more than any outburst ever could. Because calm suggests control, and control suggests depth. This version of you is harder to access. Not because you built walls out of bitterness, but because you refined your boundaries. Access now requires alignment. Attention now requires substance. Energy is no longer given automatically. It is evaluated. You became less available to chaos. That doesn't mean you stopped feeling. It means you stopped displaying every feeling. You learned that not every thought deserves expression. Not every challenge requires confrontation. Power stabilized in restraint. And the more consistent you became, the less you felt the need to announce your growth. You didn't need validation for your discipline. You didn't need applause for your evolution. Clarity turned into composure. Composure turned into quiet authority, and without saying a word, you shifted the entire dynamic. They thought the price would be your collapse, that the pressure would exhaust you, that isolation would erode your confidence, that doubt, repeated often enough, would become your identity. But the price came due, just not the way they expected. The cost was never your downfall. It was your discipline. While they were distracted by comfort, you were building control. You learned to wake up without motivation and still move, to execute without applause, to continue without reassurance. Discipline stopped being a phase and became your baseline. The price was your solitude, the empty rooms, the quiet weekends, the distance from spaces that once felt familiar. They assumed isolation would weaken you, make you desperate to return. Instead, it introduced you to yourself. Without noise, you could hear your own thoughts clearly. Without constant input, your vision sharpened. You stopped absorbing everyone else's expectations and started defining your own. The price was your emotional control. You felt everything, but you stopped reacting to everything. You learned that mastery isn't suppression, it's selection. Choosing when to speak, choosing when to move, choosing when to let silence do the work. The price was your vision. While others were focused on short-term validation, you were thinking years ahead, building habits that compound, guarding energy like an asset, seeing patterns before they fully formed. They assumed pressure would fracture you. It forged you. Every setback became resistance training. Every betrayal clarified your standards. Every lonely stretch reinforced your independence. What they meant as limitation became conditioning. You're operating from somewhere deeper now, not from impulse, not from insecurity, not from the need to prove, from structure, from self-trust, from long-term awareness. And here's the truth most people won't understand. This transformation is rare. Most people break under sustained pressure. Most people retreat to comfort the moment growth feels isolating. You didn't. The price was paid in discipline, solitude, restraint, and vision. And what you received in return wasn't survival. It was power. Here's what makes this different. You are not reacting anymore. You are building. There was a time when every slight felt personal. Every delay felt threatening. Every misunderstanding demanded correction. Now, you measure differently. You think in years, not moods. You weigh decisions by consequence, not emotion. Long-term thinking has replaced impulsive validation. You've learned that emotional regulation is not suppression. It's calibration. You still feel deeply, but you choose your response with intention. You no longer let temporary discomfort dictate permanent decisions. Strategic silence has become one of your sharpest tools. You understand that not every opportunity deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your rebuttal. Sometimes the strongest position is the one that doesn't reveal itself too early. Delayed gratification no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like control. While others chase quick recognition, you're stacking habits. While they look for shortcuts, you are reinforcing foundations. The difference won't always be visible today, but time exposes structure. Most people collapse under pressure. You condensed. Pressure didn't scatter you. It compressed you into something more focused, more precise, more intentional. You became selective with your circle, disciplined with your time, protective of your direction, and the rare part? You're not loud about it. There's no need to announce evolution when it's evident in posture, in boundaries, in consistency. Confidence has shifted from performance to presence, but understand this clearly. This isn't your final form. What you've built so far is structure. What you're becoming requires even deeper refinement, higher standards, sharper discipline, greater patience. The version of you emerging now is only the foundation for what's next. And when you look forward, you don't see revenge. You see expansion. Picture the version of you a few years from now. Not louder, not harsher, just steadier. Your presence carries weight without effort. You walk into rooms without scanning for approval. You speak without over-explaining. You listen more than you reveal. Calm has replaced urgency. There's an unshaken composure about you. The kind that doesn't flinch at subtle disrespect. The kind that doesn't rush to defend itself. The kind that understands timing. Magnetic restraint becomes your signature. You don't react instantly. You don't expose every plan. You don't announce every win. There's depth behind your eyes, a quiet calculation that doesn't need validation to continue. The people who underestimated you will sense the distance. Not hostility distanced, a boundary they can't quite cross anymore. A version of you that no longer seeks their approval, no longer argues for understanding, no longer bends to maintain access. You won't need to expose anyone. Time reveals everything. Consistency exposes doubt. Discipline exposes laziness. Results expose projection. You won't have to say, "I told you so." Your evolution will say enough. And the most powerful part? You won't even be focused on them. This future version of you doesn't chase validation, doesn't rehearse revenge scenarios, doesn't replay old conversations searching for closure. Energy is invested forward. Attention is directed toward growth. You become harder to read because you're no longer trying to be understood by everyone. And from that space of detachment, something settles in. Not pride, authority, the kind that doesn't need noise to prove it. Now the tone changes. No threats, no dramatic declarations, no revenge fantasies playing in the background. Just awareness they made a deal expecting your collapse. Instead, they financed your evolution. Every doubt they projected forced you to self-reflect. Every closed door redirected your focus. Every moment of isolation strengthened your independence. What was meant to limit you became resistance training. You were never cursed. You were being refined. The pressure wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The loneliness wasn't abandonment. It was alignment. The misunderstandings weren't proof of your inadequacy. They were proof that you were operating on a different frequency. The price came due, and it forged you, not into someone bitter, into someone precise. You no longer move emotionally. You move intentionally. You no longer seek to be understood by everyone. You focus on being understood by yourself. That shift alone changes everything. There is a calmness in you now, a grounded certainty. You don't need to announce growth when it's embedded in your habits. You don't need to prove strength when it's reflected in your restraint. And here's the final truth. You don't need permission anymore not to grow, not to detach, not to evolve beyond the roles they assigned you. And you don't need revenge. Because the version of you standing here now has already done something far greater. You've outgrown the contract.